Okay, welcome folks. Thank you for joining us for our Religious Interfaith Roundtable, our monthly series as part of our program for learning and community engagement. My name is Craig McCashin, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the program, the PLACE program, for those of you who are in the know. And I'm going to introduce our first panelist, and then I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves. Our topic for today is the miraculous. So we'll be looking at questions of miracles from a variety of different backgrounds. Each of the participants will have a chance to kind of weigh in, talk about what they mean and to them. And then we'll see, we'll have a conversation with the audience and so forth. So how about we start with Rabbi Jana? How about you go ahead and start? Oh, you are still muted, however. I know, sorry.
I saw that. That's bad. I'm muted again. Hi, Rabbi Jana de Benedetti from Shreveport, Louisiana, B'nai Zion congregation. And I guess out of the group that's here, I think, I'm looking at who's here, maybe we started it, this miracle things, because I think that we may be the oldest faith out of all of the ones here, but I'm not sure. We'll find out in a minute. But there's a kind of a common concept of what a miracle is. And it's something like expecting something out of the ordinary, or not expecting something, when something happens out of the ordinary. And I want to propose another way of looking at it. I want you to think about this. Imagine that all of life is awesome. All of life is filled with awe. Everything you look at, you can't have any expectations of what things are going to be. Everything happens because God wants it to be that way. And so a miracle, in Hebrew, the word for miracle is nes. And a miracle is more like a sign of something. And it's a sign of God's presence in the world. And so throughout history, that sign has changed a little bit depending on the period and the places we lived, et cetera, and what the surrounding people thought about. So, but in the beginning, you imagine, I mean, even just the beginning, the things that God did, creating the world in our eyes may be miraculous, but it's just a sign of God's role in the world and knowing that God has a place. God is the force in the world that makes things happen. Eventually, there were many things. There's lots of stories throughout times of lots of things that have been miracles over time. But I just want you to think of it that way. I want you to think of it as a sign. Often it's a sign that God is somehow intervening to change the way life is. So we, for example, in biblical times have things like Passover, where God let the children of Israel escape Egypt with signs and wonders and signs. We have fast forward a bunch of, and there were many other things that would happen. Joshua blowing horns and walls falling down. That's not typical. All kinds of other things in biblical times, including Hanukkah is a celebration of miracles that happened, and just continuously, but it's about intervening in time. And I wanted to point out, we're about to celebrate a holiday from the book of Esther. And I want to point out that whenever there's a time when it feels like the odds are against us and we survive, like at the time with the book of Esther, that we didn't look like we were going to survive. It looked like the bad guy, Haman. Boo. We're all supposed to boo and make noise when we hear his name. When Haman was planning to destroy us, we survived. And it may be that it was things that we did, or it may be that it was God intervening. Although that particular book, God isn't mentioned at all, but we always presume that that's what's going on. But they're miracles. I have one other thing I wanted to talk about for miracles. In Jewish tradition, there is a tradition that you say 100 blessings every day. And in the morning, part of the morning prayers are a section of the service called Nisim B'chol Yom, everyday miracles. And it's things like separating land from water and letting me understand the difference between day and night, which has been really important during the pandemic, trying to figure out which is day and night. And it's things like clothing the naked and helping the blind to see. My favorite one is that each of us, thank you for creating me in God's image. But I don't like to think of them as something that is out of the ordinary. I try to think of these things as something that makes me realize how awesome life is, and that we're part of this interaction with God in this awesome world. So that's where I'm going to start, and I'll relinquish my spot.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. I would like that. My name is Schroeder. I am the pastoral counselor at First Baptist Texarkana. So Jeff Shreve is the lead pastor, but whenever he's unable to do something, he calls on me. So I'm kind of filling in for him. He's done this before. I've come to this before. I think it's a great idea. And I've been in Texarkana about 4 years. Southern Baptist Church. Before that, I was in the Church of the Nazarene. I was a lead pastor at 2 churches in the Church of the Nazarene. So I have a little Wesleyan, have a little Baptist. And I'm going to talk about miracles today. And, this word I think is used kind of lightly. We talk about miracles in sports. We talk about, the miracle on ice. You guys are way too young for that. Miracle on ice. Miracles in movies. We use that word kind of flippantly. We use it kind of lightly. But miracles, it's a very important thing. It's a supernatural event, something that maybe cannot be explained by science, real easily explained. I read a definition from the Baker Encyclopedia of Apologetics that I really liked and resonated with. It says about miracles, from the human vantage point, a miracle is an unusual event, which is a wonder, that conveys and confirms an unusual message, which is a sign, by means of unusual power. So I really like what the rabbi said about, a sign, basically a sign pointing to the divine, something that points to the divine. And we see all kinds of different miracles. We see types of miracles. In the scriptures, we see types of miracles. We see miracles over nature. We see the miracle of healing, where there's a sickness, where there's a physical sickness, and there's a laying of hands, and there's an actual healing. We see miracles with demonic forces, when demonic forces are asked to leave. Miracle of provision, and then the ultimate miracle for an evangelical Christian is the miracle of the resurrection. There's no more important miracle to us than the miracle of someone coming back to life, the miracle of the resurrection.
Okay, thanks. Patrick. Wonderful. Reverend Patrick Evans, United Methodist at Hardy Memorial United Methodist Church. It's my 6th year here. So we covered kind of the idea of signs and wonders, of the idea of supernatural, and I consider miracles this way often in which God communicates with us. And when it takes place in a personal way, it's as though God winks at us to communicate that God lets us know that God is present. The idea of supernatural, it's an interesting combination of a word. It's natural, but greater than natural. So often within miracles and signs and wonders, we see God's power, but we see God's power setting things right. So in bringing the Israelites out of captivity, they were moving from slavery to freedom through the outstretched and mighty arm of God. Well, this is a miraculous thing, but it is setting things that were wrong into a right condition. Jesus' healings, they are restoring health. Well, to restore health is to move things to a pre-fallen state, to return a dead child, to give somebody sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf. So all of these are a movement from the broken into the wholeness. And it's the intentions of what God had originally set about. For us, they're miraculous. The word unexpected and unexplainable, except for from the otherworldly. Other than from what we can explain with our 5 senses and through science, for something to be miraculous and beyond that. But I think the good rabbi brings about this particular point. Every breath is a miracle. Every sunrise, the existence of anything, these are all miraculous signs of God, but we see them as ordinary. So how we live our lives interpret how we see miracles. But miracles, wonders, and signs, to me, are all a means in which God speaks to us. And are we aware and are we listening?
Okay, Father Braun, I'm the pastor at Sacred Heart in Texarkana, and there's a lot of fun avenues to go down this, but in a basic sense, Catholic priests deal with the miraculous a little more often. And I'm not saying that to brag, but it really is the case that we deal with the miraculous in a very tangible way much more often than the average person, let alone the average pastor, because largely, I say that from the standpoint of when it comes to dealing with evil, especially, and that's the kind of negative side of the miraculous. But when it comes to dealing with the demonic, people call Catholic priests. Now, whether they want to acknowledge that or not, they're going to call us first, or even I've had it happen here. A pastor from a non-Catholic church is going to call me and say, "Hey, I've got somebody who's dealing with a really intense, but from what I can surmise, obsession or possession from a demon. Can you meet with them and talk with them?" Sure, I'll be happy to. But the daily interaction with the miraculous is not all that negative. So we also work with bread and wine that we believe as Catholics becomes the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's the foundation of our Mass. And so we come into contact, and I brought a little pamphlet that I do want to share with those who are interested about just Eucharistic miracles, miracles that have happened and have been recorded in current, or contemporary history that have the scrutiny of atheistic scientism to study them and give us some answers or give us some acknowledgement that, yeah, whatever has happened here, we cannot determine that it is scientific. So it's something other than scientific. It's something that is supernatural. Now, I want to point one thing out that's made this whole conversation, I think, determinatively difficult for us as Americans living in the 21st century. It's not a shot against any of my non-Catholic brothers, because the Catholics are as guilty as anybody. But about 250 years ago, basically every intellectual reading of Scripture came to the point where they rejected the miraculous in Scripture. It's called the Jesus Seminar, the Jesus Project, to the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. It's kind of duality where no longer is the Jesus of history who you read about in the Gospels really the same Christ and Savior who could have performed these miracles. So miracles largely, from an academic standpoint, got turned over to being, like the best example is the feeding the 5,000. It was really just an actual nice community meal, right? Where we deny the miraculous power that God has in his divinity, that Jesus has in his divinity, to actually do something supernatural. And so this didn't set into the people so quickly, but for 200 plus years, academically, this has been an issue. And it's made it very easy, and it has trickled down to where we no longer want to acknowledge that there is anything particularly miraculous that happens. So when we hear about a miracle, like a statue crying, for example, I don't know if you've ever heard of those kinds of miracles, but we hear about that and we just write it off and say, oh no, that's just some undereducated third world country who doesn't really know what's going on. And it's easy because we have the arrogance of being a scientific culture and a scientist or scientism mentality to say, yeah, if we can't prove it under a microscope, then it's not real. Well, explain to me then how people go to Lourdes, which is a miraculous healing pool in France, and people literally who are paralyzed are dipped in the water and walk away. That happens every day, all year round, all the time. And nobody can explain. But we live in such a world that we say, no, we don't want to deal. And I think part of it is internally, and you guys can speak differently, but we kind of we're scared of the miraculous, because if that's real, give the devil his due. If the devil is real, then we got to deal with this whole God question. But if we can deny the devil, then we can deny God, and it's easier to just be faithless, and in a sense, deny that which is true.
Father Halt. Father Halt, I'm at St. James Episcopal in downtown Texarkana. Now, the topic's been pretty well covered. I would nuance it in another direction. Working off, Father, we have a hermeneutic of doubt in our culture, and it's become very strong in the Enlightenment, that unless I prove it, most authorities are not going to convince me of anything. unless they happen to wear white lab coats, then they convince me of anything because, they've got a scientific background. We up here, and Rabbi, I assume, are also scientists of a different type. We are religious scientists. We put in practice our faith, and we come to certain understandings and certain discoveries in our spiritual science. And one of those discoveries is that the great line dividing all things is really the difference between the creator and the creation. Creator and the creation. And so we can say things like God intervenes in some sort of a supernatural way, or God enters then into time in a different way. But in reality, if the line of division between creator and creation, and the creation exists because of the creator, does not the creation continue to exist by the will of the creator, by the energy of the creator, by the love of the creator, whatever you want to call that energy of God? If so, is not every moment miraculous? Are we all not living miracles? Because none of us exist because of our own will. None of us exist because we are self-created. That God is involved in every moment of our lives, whether or not we want to acknowledge it, whether or not we want to believe it, but that's the truth. So the sunrise this morning is a miracle. The breath we take is a miracle. When I look at my son, even when he and I are at odds because he's not doing everything I would have him to do, living the life I want him to live, his life is still a miracle. And yes, there are times when things are maybe more miraculous than others. There are other special things that occur. But if we start understanding that the world around us exists by the will, by the love of God, and we start attuning our worldview from a worldview that is rooted in our own doubt of all things, or placing, as Descartes did, the I, the me, in the center of all things, I think, therefore I. We start looking at the world differently, we might just find there are miracles all over the place. And look at a world filled with wonder. Yes, but there is evil in the world, I'm not denying that. But that this world still exists by the love and mercy of God, despite everything that we have done, others have done to mess it up, that's miraculous. So I think it was G.K. Chesterton, I'm paraphrasing, that said, why does the sun come up every morning? The scientists will tell you it's because of the rotational pattern of the earth following its orbit, right? And that tomorrow morning at about 6:45, that sun's going to come up whether we want it to or not. But what if, you ever seen a child toss a ball to a child, you throw a child up in the air and catch him again, and they look at you and say, do it again, do it again, do it again. And it's just a joyous moment, do it again, do it again, do it again. What if God is like that child that tells the sun every morning, do it again, do it again, do it again. And we find that our Father is actually growing younger than we are. That's the miraculous.
It's good that you have more patience. Okay, thank you very much, folks. It was a good introduction, certainly from, kind of a whole variety of different perspectives. That probably covers, I sent a few questions, kind of in email before this, and that probably covers the first and the last, how common are miracles and essentially what miracles are. As someone who studies medieval religion, I can spend all day beating up the Enlightenment. Certainly, if you all want, we can go to town on it all the time. Because I think there was this notion, I think there was this notion that the miraculous was more apparent, maybe, prior to the Enlightenment, right? More people kind of interacted with miraculous ideas. And so I guess the next question that I would have, and we can always have a conversation and such like, if we want, is how do miracles, what is their relationship? I think in the email I put it to faith. How does it underscore someone's faith? How is it connected to it? Or are they two, separate? Can they exist separately? if that makes sense. Essentially, how do miracles intersect with a person's faith? Or lack thereof. And yeah, I will say, Father Jana, or Rabbi Jana, if you want to jump in, you can either just jump right in or you can put your hand up just because you're the only one on Zoom for us. But I'll open it up to anyone who wants to say it.
I think it's huge for our faith. I mean, miracles strengthen our faith. You know, if we have our eyes open, as they were sharing, if we have our eyes open to see miracles, I think they would strengthen our faith. Miracles point to the reality of the presence of something beyond ourselves, a divine creator, a creation story. I believe in the creation story. I believe that God spoke into existence each thing, methodically spoke things into existence and said it is good. And he spoke people into existence and said it's very good. And so the creation story points to a miracle, the importance of the miracle. Jesus, how Jesus came to be, how Jesus was born is a miracle. And then the fact that he lived a perfect sinless life and miracles that he performed, that all strengthens my faith. And then even just for us as evangelical Christians, the miracle of salvation, that I believe that I have sin in my life because of Genesis 3, because of the original sin. I have sin in my life and I continue to struggle with sin. But because of Jesus and what was accomplished through Jesus, through the sacrifice that he made, I have opportunity for salvation. So to me, that is a miracle that God would save me through his son, Jesus. That's a miracle. And then, when Jesus was thinking about, with this topic, was thinking about the fact that when Jesus healed, when he said, do you want to be well? Do you want to be well? And then he said, your faith has made you well. So we see a connection between faith and miracles. So, and I agree what these guys are saying. I believe there is such a stigma to miracles. And the statistics say that the younger generation are less likely to believe in miracles as older generation. Still, more than 50% of people believe that miracles happen today, but less of the younger generation believe that miracles are happening. So we could talk about that forever for various reasons that's happening. But there's definitely a stigma towards miracles. But I believe miracles are extremely important in strengthening my own faith.
There are also challenges. I'll give you, can I use bad language?
I don't know, can you?
Well, I know I can,
Of course, yeah.
So, proper English, man, I get that. So I'll give you three. These are personal, so it's my own personal story. One is a Eucharistic miracle. In the middle of distributing Holy Communion, when I have counted exactly how many posts I need and know exactly how many I need, and have consecrated the exact number I need, and look up and realize all of a sudden that I've got 3 or 4 extra people in the parish that I did not know were there, didn't count right, and I was running short. And I look down, I can see 3 or 4 coming, and I have not enough hosts to go around in that moment. Yet somehow, without breaking the hosts apart, commune everybody there without going back to the altar for more bread. Okay, that's Eucharistic miracle. This past summer, my wife and I were on the island of Catalonia and went to reverence the relics of St. Gerasimos, the patron saint of the island, and reverenced his relics. If you've never done that, it involved kissing the body of the saint and praying at the site. And he's known for healing, and we received holy oil from the monastery. And that afternoon, after I'd come out of the ocean from a nice time snorkeling, I was going to rinse off my bathing suit. I opened the window in the bathroom, and then by the time I reached down, turned the water on, stood up, the window had started to close, sharp metal edge, top of the head, to the point that you could see the skull. I cut it that badly. Sunday evening, 4 hours away from any type of medical care. Put pressure on, first aid, a little confused. My wife took the oil, anointed me, prayed with me, asked for the intercession of St. Gerasimos. The next morning I was in the ocean. swimming, healed. That's a little miracle. But I give you the bigger one. You don't know me very well yet. But if you knew me before Jesus, before I knew Jesus, yeah, I'm gonna say it. I'm an asshole. Okay? The miracle is I'm much less of one now because of Jesus, because of my relationship with Christ. That's a miracle. You would have known me before. That's a miracle.
My students in my medieval civ course today were reading the St. Bonaventure Life of St. Francis, so yeah, there's synergy there as well.
Thanks for your honesty.
Some people say.
Anyone else?
Well, I wanted to pick up on something Pastor Chris said about how important is miracles to our faith, was Christians, particularly. And I'm not speaking to the Jewish community, although I think that there would be certainly a correlation. But if you don't believe in the resurrection, then it's all shut. This all is just, I mean, anybody who calls himself Christian, if you don't believe in that fundamental miracle that Jesus Christ died, actually died a bodily death, descended into hell, and rose from the dead, if you don't believe in that, then don't call yourself Christian, because that is what it means. We are people of a resurrected God. So for us, it's everything in a sense. But at the same time, and maybe to take that really big foundational miracle, what about all these other miracles? What about what happened with our brother here, Father Halt? What about things I just told you about what's happened in my life? Working with demons, working. Does it make a difference that you believe any of that? No. That's the good news. Miracles are intended to help. The word itself means remarkable or wonder, miracus in Latin. They're helping to open our eyes, right? And a miracle, I think this is contextually true from all of us, it has to build up the body of God, the body of Christ. So if some lady sees Jesus in her toast on a Tuesday, and hey, we've probably, well, I don't know if y'all have, but I get those kinds of emails all the time. Father, did you see this? She saw it on Tuesday. Oh, great. That lady saw Jesus in her cinnamon toast crunch on Tuesday morning in her milk. Awesome. Does it confirm my faith that Jesus is God? No, not really, because, that cinnamon toast crunch could move about an inch to the side, and then it's just like cinnamon toast crunch. But when those miracles do happen that truly are, one, analyzed with great great speculation. And when I say atheists, that's literally who the Vatican, the church, we hire atheists to look at any miraculous thing, because they're going to bring their skepticism of non-believing into the equation, which is great, because then it's no longer some Catholic doctor said X. No, it's an atheistic Chinese doctor who, as a communist, is by nature not going to be a believing person and is professed as a non-believing person, studies this Eucharistic miracle that has a piece of bread that's become heart tissue, and at that distressed heart tissue from a Middle Eastern name, but it's producing white blood cells. Like that level of intense specificity from somebody else who doesn't believe gives me a reason to have deeper belief. But is my belief only based on those miracles? No, none of those miracles ever happened. Still fundamentally, Christ rose from the dead. And if you're a Christian, that's the miracle of miracles and the one that matters the most.
I was going to say, I think that you proved a lot of what I was saying too about the definition. I was doing it from a linguistic perspective to some extent to say that it's a sign, and it doesn't change the fact that God is interacting in the world, whether we see it or not. I really like the picture in the cinnamon toast crunch. That's got me thinking a lot, because seriously, because that is a sign, and it doesn't necessarily change my world, but if I'm the one who sees a sign, then it does put a new kind of meaning to the world, which does help to enhance my faith or my appreciation of life, which I believe is also an appreciation of God. I wanted to share a personal story, which I think is there are lots of miracles all the time. I'm always experiencing miracles and signs, but during the pandemic, we were sitting on a Zoom. After services Friday night, normally we would be gathering together around a table after services, and we would be having some kind of snacks, cheese and crackers and stuff like that at services at the synagogue. But we've been doing it on Zoom. And I'm with people from like 7 different states. And it's Hanukkah. It's during the Shabbat of Hanukkah. And the point about Hanukkah is that it's a celebration of a miracle. So there are 2 primary miracles we're supposed to celebrate. One is that this small group of people who were just farmers and shepherds were able to defeat this professional army. And the other miracle is, according to this story, is that there was only enough oil to burn in the menorah, which we were commanded to light, and there was only enough for one day. And it was going to take 8 days to make more, and it burned for 8 days. That's the story we're told. And we love that miracle. And it's a miracle about light. And there's lots of wonderful things we can say about light helping to make the world a better place and all of that. So with that in mind, here I am, and it's after services, and I'm sitting at my, right here, where I'm sitting right now. I'm sitting in my house, at my office in my house, and I'm running the Zoom from my computer. And all of a sudden, there's this boom explosion sound outside my house. And it was a transformer that blew out, and my house went pitch black. There's no power whatsoever in my house. But I didn't lose the Zoom. and everything is black in the house, except I still have all these people from all over the country looking at me, and we're still on the Zoom. I know what happened. I mean, I can tell you that I'm sitting here and it's a laptop. So if the power goes out, there's battery backup, there's battery in there. And I know that my cable and my modem are both on an uninterruptible power supply that is a battery backup that will let us continue for about 20 minutes so that we could shut everything down. I know how it happened, but the fact that it happened, and especially that it happened during Hanukkah, during this miracle time, I don't think any of us are going to forget that happened. And so I go back to what we were saying is and this isn't instead of, this is adding to what you're saying, that these signs help us find more meaning in life. And if the sun didn't come up, that could be a miracle. And if the sun does come up, I hope you know that that's a miracle too. I have another suggestion. This is maybe more about prayer. I wonder sometimes people pray for miracles a lot. And as you've already heard, there are times when there are ways that those miracles can be accomplished. But I sometimes wonder if miracle prayers are misguided. So wouldn't it be nice if instead of, and I know this is kind of blasphemous in Louisiana at least, if instead of praying for, let's say, the Saints to win the football game, we put those prayers toward curing cancer. If everybody was praying for their football team, because some people's prayers are not going to get answered in that. And I don't know which is the miracle, that they win or that they don't win. But sometimes I worried about those misguided prayers. And the one of the ones, since we're sitting here at a school, one of the ones that I think is the most misguided is, oh my gosh, I should have been studying and I forgot to study. Please, God, help me pass this test. And I'm not sure why God needs to be using up a miracle for you for that one. How does that help? I have a very different attitude about miracles these days, but look for signs and appreciate those signs.
Sure.
So is an essential of faith. The good father here made the very essential point that Christianity is unapologetically a supernatural religion. Unapologetically. At the center of our belief system is Jesus resurrected. And without that, Scripture says we're to be pitied above everybody else. That is, if we believe it and we're wrong, we're fools. Like foolish beyond foolish. Because the worldview that we live out is based on a crucified God. All right? So to metaphorically also unpack that, it is to love your enemies. It is to not take retribution when it's yours. It is the opposite of the jungle life, the opposite of the survival of the fittest. And so Christianity is the only counter culture to the world's power systems. And so to then sign up to love your enemies, to sign up to do all these things is utter foolishness if Christ is not risen from the dead. It's a bad idea.
It's terrible.
It's a terrible idea. And so what's funny is we're sitting up here going, we espouse the worst ideas ever if Christ really isn't risen.
Well, and the key to that is I'm gonna die to myself
Yeah, I mean,
on behalf of other people.
these are awful ideas, unless, of course, this is who God is. God came and sacrificed God's self so that we might follow the way. And so the idea of sacrifice, the idea of love, all of these are unpacked in a very opposite way of what I would call the ancient pagan religions. People of the book have a different view than the pagan religions and how they work, which is a way of controlling and manipulating and running everything. Now, I really like I hadn't thought about the idea of kind of the worldview split in Enlightenment, which really led us into kind of a split in worldview in Christianity in the Western world, in which we've led down the road of all the miracles are either metaphorical or all of the Bible is literal. So you end up with a literal metaphorical split, right? And so we have fundamentalism, to which I say it puts fun and mental together, fundamental. And so, yeah, I'm there for you. And so miracles, in my view, when somebody says are miracles factual and are they metaphorical, my answer is yes. They're both metaphorical and they factually happen. So when we look at the healing of the return of the ability to hear, the ability to see, to then reread scripture and go, what is it to see? What is it to hear? What is it to walk again? What is it to be made whole? And in each of these miracles, what is the metaphorical truth that is included with the physical truth? And where those intersections, there is truth. I don't know if that's helpful, but I've also experienced miracles in my ministry. Some personally, one that was particularly interesting, and I had a church member come in and he says, I've got to come talk to you today because something happened and I don't know how to deal with it. And he had a very scientific worldview. And he came in to visit with me because he had woken up early in the morning and then fell back asleep and had a very vivid dream of a good friend of his who met him at the golf course and told him, don't worry about me, everything is fine. And then he got up and walked out of the dining room. Well, what was interesting about this encounter was his particular friend had had a stroke 10 or 12 years before, had not walked or spoken in that entire period of time. And that morning, unbeknownst to him, had passed away and died. And so he died that morning, and before he heard his friend had died, his friend visited him in a dream and told him everything was fine, and then left the room. And so he came in and he asked me as a clergy person, what do you do with this? And he goes, and he was particularly humble. He's like, why would he come speak to me? And I go, well, these are all really good questions, right? So the great thing about being a pastor is a lot of times you get asked questions, you go, like I know, but you try to help, and I go, well, maybe it was the message you needed. You propose ideas, and for him, the idea of miracles was beyond something that would happen. But when presented with this, his worldview was an emergency. And so, one of his great questions was, is this common? And I go, I don't know that I would call it common, but I wouldn't call it uncommon. It doesn't happen every day, but it happens every day somewhere. But Tom Jones, yeah, God bless y'all for not knowing who Tom Jones is.
A bit of a dated.
There you go.
Okay.
So anyway, I've rambled way too long.
No, I was gonna pause here just for a second and see if there was anyone from the audience who wanted to ask any question. Playing moments. I mean, I'm perfectly happy to have a speak now. Anyone from the audience have any questions?
So don't be afraid, please. We don't bite.
Not hard.
Very helpful.
Okay,
Okay, Father Hall.
I do wanna.
Yeah.
Just say something that needs to be said, I think. And no, I don't think there's any of us up here that would deny the scientific method. It's, science and faith are not at odds. Okay?
When we go to the dentist, we get Novocaine.
Yes, trust me. Okay.
And we think it's a miracle. I don't know.
It's one of those kids that-
Are you on? Yeah, okay, just checking.
Yeah. Yes.
See, there's a question.
Oh, yeah, Dr. Braun.
Are miracles always something good that happens?
I was thinking of that. I was hoping someone would ask that because what if you're praying for a miracle and it doesn't happen? You're praying for someone to be healed and it doesn't happen. Unanswered prayer. So things don't just fall into place. Life is tough. People get sick. People you would never think bad things happen to good people. And so there is such thing as unanswered prayer. Garth Brooks wrote a song, thank God. I thank God for unanswered prayers. And, I believe that someday we will have more answers of why things weren't answered the way that we thought they should be. So trusting that there is someone divine greater than us that knows better than we do about why certain prayers are answered and certain prayers aren't answered in the way that we would think that they should be.
I would say there's part doctor's perspective on that, right? I mean, ultimately, the things of God work for good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But, if I'm living in Jericho and the walls fall down, that may be a miracle, but I sure don't think it's good for me. Right? So I think that's that perspective that we need to be careful. And I also think sometimes we should be careful about asking for miracles. Because are we sure we really want it?
Right.
And what the result will be and the commitment.
Responsibility comes with healing.
I want to take your question. I want one point on this. So miraculous is also to be understood in a very kind of strictly speaking from a dictionary point of view. It's anything that's not natural, right? So yeah, the demonic, that's not good. Like it doesn't, I don't like the idea that the demonic or the reality that the demonic exists, but is it miraculous? Yes, by a strict definition, because it's not natural, right? It's supernatural. So you're dealing with a word that can be, in other cultures even can mean something very different. To say the word miracle in Spanish, milagro, people would attribute milagros to Santa Muerte, which is total superstition and the worship of a saint that does not exist, the saint of death, right? So in a very strict term, we tend to, as I think Europeans and Americans thinking in this kind of Christian ethos, yeah, it's a good thing. But the miraculous itself can be attributed to those negative things that are not natural.
It must be tested because evil can mimic.
Right. The good.
Good spirits.
May I share one for a second too? We talked about the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, and the children of Israel get to escape on dry land. And when they make it to the other side, the waters close down, and yay, they drowned all the soldiers who were trying to get at us. And the children of Israel are dancing and celebrating on the other side. And the story is that the angels are dancing with the children of Israel. They were glad that the children were that the Israelites were safe, and God wasn't cheering. And they asked God, "Why are you not cheering?" And God said, "Aren't they my people too?" And so I wonder then if sometimes miracles have two sides to them.
Yeah, that's critical.
Mine wasn't necessarily a question. It was more like I believe that everything falls into life for a place, and if the miracle didn't happen when you asked for it, maybe it's because it wasn't meant to happen at that moment. It was probably meant to happen either not at all or a later point of time in your life. It falls into place. Doesn't necessarily mean no one's listening to you. I just necessarily think it means that at the moment, yours was not as important as probably someone else's whose miracle that really needed to happen.
God stays outside of time and
Speaking
space.
as a Catholic
Yeah.
and believing in different.
God staying outside of time and space, he, and knowing everything, like it's an eternal now, like there's no yesterday, tomorrow, or today, it's just all now. God, his action directly and personally in people's lives is very much according to his will. And something that I think helps a lot of us to distinguish even unanswered prayers from, I'll say, bad prayers. Like going back to the miracle, the whole student asking God for the miracle of a good grade. What's going to make God happier and what is truly pleasing to God is that you be a good student, right? First and foremost, that you live out who you are rather than live out what you are not, right? So God permitting you to fail is not God not answering your prayers. It's God letting you carry out your natural teleology. You've chosen not to be a good student. So the bad grades that you get is a natural consequence of that teleology. Does that mean that God will never intervene in the life of somebody who prays for an A when they've studied for the grade of a C? No, God can do it, but God would rather not intervene and overwhelm, because then you become dependent on God in a way that treats him like a magician and not like a loving father. A loving father wants to see his kids succeed on their own completely, and wants to not have to intervene in their life and bail them out of jail and all those things, right? So God, when he does intervene, he can do it anytime he wants to, but what he would rather see is kind of back to the conversation before we started, saying, we're all called to be saints. Whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whoever, we're all called to be holy, right? And to live out our holiness is what pleases our Father the most. Father Halt mentioned his moral conversion. Well, think about the woman caught in adultery. That miracle in John chapter 8 is not that Jesus stopped a bunch of men from stoning a woman. It's that that woman's faith, as Chris said earlier, saved her. She was down on the ground, caught in adultery, knew that stoning was the juridical punishment. And Jesus gets on the ground, lovingly looks at her and says, go and sin no more. That moral conversion is more impactful than giving somebody the ability to walk. Why? Because the ability to walk is something that can happen on a dime. The ability to turn away from sin, we all know it, is so much harder. So acting, there was a lot, but acting upon this idea that God, when he intervenes, he's always doing it when he wants to, because he knows what's actually our best, but also recognizing God wants us to fulfill our actual nature and live the way we're called to live. And then, guess what? You no longer treat God like a magician. You don't call him when you're stressed out. You call him every day in prayer and say, I love you and thank you for the blessings of my day life.
Caitlin?
Yeah,
I think Tyler had a question.
I was actually thinking about your point. And I think actually there are some bad things that can be miracles in a way. Like for example, when I drink too much alcohol, I have my muscles get very tense the next day, and it's very painful. It's very unpleasant. I don't like drinking a lot of alcohol because of that. But I actually grew up with an alcoholic parent, and so it's kind of like a small miracle. I didn't become an alcoholic. Just, like maybe that was placed in my life because I shouldn't be an alcoholic, or I shouldn't, want to drink. And that may have actually steered me towards not doing that. So I think like something that might seem outwardly bad on its own could actually point you in directions that ultimately are good as like a miracle. So like a bad thing could be a miracle, I think.
And Joseph says too, Joseph says in Genesis, at the end of Genesis chapter 50, he says, what you meant for evil, God has turned into good. So it's like the belief that God has the last word, God has the last say. So things that don't look good and don't look like they're going in the way that we want, God has the last say, turns it for good.
Also, for sin abounds, grace abounds.
Yeah.
All the more. And even a demon possession Where's the good in that? Well, when you dispossess a person of their evil, the evil that they're consumed by, it's a whole new person, right? So there's a great good that comes out of this very negative, miraculous experience, this negative experience of the miraculous. But looking at that question too, and sorry, this part of the conversation is very interesting to me. If we can think about it for a moment, like think about it, you're college students, some of you guys know are not college students. I'm not a college student. Think about the very fact that when people want to do something to commemorate, like right now we got this war in Europe, it's not good, right? What did people want to do for the people in the Ukraine? We want to send them food, we want to send them everything we can. God working through people to our, because we're so selfish, it's not even, it's hard to imagine, right, how selfish we are as human beings. For us to be able to say, you know, there are men and women from our country who have gone over to Ukraine, putting themselves in harm's way right now to put food on somebody's table. That's miraculous, because we overcome our selfishness. And you it's like, that's working with college and teenage students, most of my priesthood, like seeing that change. Gosh, only God can do that. Because the world says to you, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. And Jesus says the worst slogan ever: deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Eat, drink, and be merry, or deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Which one of those wins with 99% of human beings? Eat, drink, and be merry, because that's fun, and it doesn't hurt. Suffering, denying yourself, ooh, no thanks.
Sounds like a bad idea.
Real bad idea. And the only reason it's a good idea is because he wrote
It's true,
it down.
yeah, because it's the truth. One of the things that's interesting about becoming a believer is I view the center of time as the cross. And so when we accept grace, when we accept and become saved, get saved, I can steal my Baptist friends' language, it redeems our future. That seems very easy to understand. But it also redeems our past. It has a redemptive work of the broken things in our life that came before, that God can use the broken things in our lives because of the healing he does now. So it's interesting how out of the center of forgiveness and out of the center of our acceptance, it rolls out healing both in history and into the future. And that's a miraculous thing that you can change. In a way, you change time.
All right, Tyler, you have questions?
I have a question, and I hope it doesn't come off as pessimistic.
Oh, please.
It might take a turn, but it's something I thought about. So you look at the current state of the world dealing with a pandemic, right? And time again, I see Facebook friends, and they're like, I'm not gonna wear a mask. God's got me, and seriously, it's posts that I've seen, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Especially in the South.
right, exactly. And then, fast forward a month, hey, we're really praying for so-and-so, they've got COVID, they're on a respirator, and we really need a miracle. So at what point, or where do you think the disconnect, because there's obviously one between science and religion, you should be able to believe in both.
Yeah.
Why don't we look at the ability to use rationalization to realize that it's a miracle that God gave me the ability to make those choices for myself. Right.
Yeah.
It's there's a big disconnect there. And I think that,
God has given us free will.
Right.
Ability to make decisions.
Right.
Ability to take evidence and to weigh it.
Right.
And then do what we want to do.
Right.
And, I think that is the miracle.
Yeah.
And, if sometimes we have to bear the consequences of our own decision.
Sure.
Can I ask a judgmental question?
So please.
Let me just ask
Me?
No. I don't want you. And so here's the judgmental question. Do you think your friends are saying that God has got this because they believe in God or because they just don't want to wear a mask?
Probably a little bit of both. Yeah.
I think as humans,
But do we hide behind that and saying it's a religious thing?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean,
there is a large thread within popular American religion that if I love God and if I am faithful, I mean, I will be offensive. There's a huge big church in Texas somewhere with a pastor with really nice hair and a jet and a big old pool who will go around and tell you that if you love Jesus enough,
Yeah.
you're gonna be rich,
Yeah.
and you're gonna be healthy, and I can't think of this guy's name.
I can.
Okay. Yeah, if you love Jesus, things are gonna be good with you, you're gonna be rich, you're gonna be great. I always ask, what about my poor friend in Africa who, loves Jesus just as much as I do, maybe even a little more, and isn't rich, doesn't have a BMW. But that thread is through American popular Christianity right now. It's huge. And so if I love God, God's got my back, I won't get sick.
Right.
I won't suffer. Well, the message of the cross is, for Christians, if you love God, guess what? You're gonna suffer.
Yeah, I sort of wonder about that because at least in my courses are mostly ancient and medieval religions. So, prior to the days of prosperity, strictly speaking. But there's always been that tension, I suppose, in Christianity in the idea, and my students have heard me talk about this, the value of suffering. There's going to be suffering before God. Versus it's a majority religion and a majority of people don't want to be poor and suffer. So there has to be some kind of connection between those two. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
But I will say this is where the idea is really useful. Okay, there is an idea where this is really useful. The early church did a lot of evangelism because they knew death wasn't the end. And so they knew, I may well get sick, I may well die, but God has got this. And so Christians during the time of the plague went into cities that people were running out of and aided and abetted people. And Christians died. And lots of them. Lots of them. And it wasn't because they said, well, God will just take care of me. Well, God will take care of me. I am no longer afraid of death. And one of the things that the cross does is the cross says that your means of power and control are torture and death and humiliation. And it's when the world knows you are innocent and yet they still convict you. When you're betrayed by your best friends, when you're abandoned by everybody else, the cross says you don't have to be controlled by that. You still should do the right thing and expect that the best person who ever lived was treated this way. It's not the end of the story. And so for me, the courage comes in, I may well die, but we're all gonna die anyway. And I don't need to die afraid and alone. Now to say that I wanna be selfish and don't wanna wear a mask, I think that's a misuse of it because I just wanna be privileged. And the cross says, we're not privileged.
It's interesting that Roger Stark did a lot of research, sociologist. Highly recommend his work, The Rise of Christianity. He studied going into the epidemics and the Christians had died and the ministry done. And while all the pagans were fleeing to get out, the Christians came in and worked with the sick. The next time the plague came through, guess who survived? The Christians, because we know through science that they now had built up an immunity, antibodies within their population. And what did the population do when they saw the Christians survive it? It's a miracle. Yes, it is. Right? And the miracle was the first going in and staying.
Well, they studied for the first place.
Right, same thing with Molokai, same example here. One thing is in very recent memory, he served in a leper colony outside of Hawaii, and eventually contracted leprosy and died. Now, the difference between St. Dane and Molokai, and I think it's hard to paint real specific or broad strokes, but the experience that a lot of Americans have with that idea of my God will take care of me is one I think is sincere, like comes from faith. Like, are they thinking my God will protect me from COVID? Maybe, but maybe they're also just thinking, listen, whatever happens, happens, and I trust that God's going to give me eternal life with him in heaven. And so it's hard to pinpoint, is that their sentiment, or is this, yeah, my God's not going to let me get COVID? Because let me tell you something, it's one of the few churches that really, really stayed open, and I have high amounts of interaction with people's mouths, where they're breathing on me a lot, and they receive communion, where their dirty hands receive communion, and my hands touch theirs. Like, the amount of transmissibility was super high. And at no point did I think, well, you know what, God, I don't believe in anything other than you, so I'm just going to be reckless. No, I washed my hands. I wore a mask for a time. The mask did eventually come off because it was pretty obvious that that was not having the effect that was desired. But the irrational side of faith is as dangerous as the non-believing side of faith. So our faith is always, St. John Paul wrote a beautiful document, it's way too long, but it's called Faith and Reason. Wrote it in 1994, I believe. And it was talking about this problem that exists, particularly in a post-enlightenment, post-Christian world. The worldview is this, a secular state cannot have miracles. Because if miracles do exist, then the secular state is no longer the greatest authority. So rooted out of that is a communist, a fascist, any kind of totalitarian dictatorship, all of them, you pick your choice in the 20th century, all of them at heart wanted to root out miracles, because if miracles exist, then that means something beyond the state exists and something you control. And I think some of that, I hate to say it, but some of that anti-communism, or some of that communism seeps into our hearts as red-blooded American as we might be, but also this faith side that says, well, God will protect me from everything. Look, God gave you a brain. And so you need to use your brain, but also recognize your complete lack of control. And that's, I think, one of the hardest things about the pandemic that we ought to learn is we don't really have a lot of control, which is a good thing to realize, but it made the whole world really kind of realize it at the same time. And that was scary. Right?
Rabbi, did you have a point?
Yeah, except it was a joke. It was one that I thought about, but and there was time for it, and then there wasn't, and then there's time, and there. But the story is this: that this man found God, became religious, and then there was this terrible flood, and the water kept getting higher and higher, and he gets up to the second floor of his house, and this boat comes by, and these guys try to throw a life preserver at him on a rope, and they say, grab the ring, grab the ring. And he says, no, I have perfect faith in God, that God will protect me, God will save me. You go and find somebody that needs help. Grab the ring, we're here, man. No, I have perfect faith that God will save me. And they have to go. There's too much wind and things, and they leave. The water keeps getting higher, and he gets to the top of the building. And he's standing there, and the water's getting higher and higher, and a helicopter comes at great risk to them because there's a lot of wind still. And they say, grab the ladder. And he says, no, I have perfect faith that God is going to save me. And they try to convince him, and he says, no, and they leave, and he dies. And so wherever he winds up, he says, I demand to talk to God right now. And they said, no problem. And so he gets to talk to God. He said, God, I had perfect faith that you were going to save me. I lived a good life. I found you, and I lived a good life. I thought you were going to save me. And God said, I sent you a boat. I sent you a helicopter. What else do you need me to do? And sometimes that's part of my everyday miracle things. But I think that I was feeling a lot of that during the pandemic also, as you were saying, that it feels like we already have the things that we need to save ourselves, to save each other. And it's not always, sometimes it's not just believing in God and ignoring the science of what's going on. I think that was a miracle too, getting that boat and that helicopter to him. And I just wish that more people were seeing the miracles in the world all the time.
Okay. Was there a question in the back that we had?
I think it was John Wesley told us, you don't check your brain at the door when you go in church.
I thought I was all the Episcopalians.
Was it all the Episcopalians?
Guys, I mean, about the pandemic, I mean, I think there's plenty of opinions, there's plenty of judgment all around. So there's people that stopped living so they wouldn't die, you know, and people that call themselves Christians and have faith, and they just shut themselves up, and now there's horrible ramifications of that, you know, the emotional toll that took on people, the isolation. So I believe a lot of guiltiness, you know, all around with the pandemic in Christians and how we looked at it and how we handled it.
It ain't no, there's none of us who are innocent.
Really?
Sorry,
Do you have any biblical evidence of that?
The whole book, one other point, on that question particularly, because there is an issue, and this may be underneath your question, and you may be asking for a reason. There's an evangelical precept, and I don't mean that in the pejorative, I mean, every Christian is evangelical. We want to tell the whole world about Jesus' resurrection. There's an evangelical precept that we believe in God, and therefore we do put our total and unqualified trust in God. But there's also in America, the American Christian idea, and we've seen a wedding of our evangelical faith get wedded to political ideology, left and right, let's be real, it's not on one party, it's both parties. And that, I think, became, in looking at the world in the last 2 years, politics became God in a way that it had never even been able to, particularly in the Americas. And I think when 20, 30, 40 years from now, when I'll be dead, these guys will most likely be dead too. The history will be interesting to see. How did this, no offense, fellas.
No, I was gonna correct you. I think we'll be more alive.
That's true, we will be. Wow. Absolutely right. But how will we look back at this in terms of its religious impact? Because the religious, political, you studying medieval history, like all this stuff is so intertwined. But fundamentally, as a person of faith, do I believe God has total control over my life?
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Do I also believe God gave me a brain? Yes, and I should use my brain because it's one of the ways in which I participate in God's nature, which is pure intellect. It's pure, I mean, like the angels, it's intellectual. I need to use my intellect as much as I can. And when it's wrong, when I'm led down the wrong path, acknowledge the wrong and correct course, right? So I hope that helps maybe push through that question a little bit.
Well, I'm but the humble moderator, I would say. In studying religious history, I think fundamentally there is a desire amongst people of faith in, and especially in an omnipotent power, to manifest that power in the world for them, right? Whether it's the pagan Romans that, you know, my students here, the Dogut days idea, so you give kind of mentality, or the Western monotheistic religions. There's that idea that God can, and I'm good, so God should, right? God will, and God often does, I suppose. Any final thoughts as we're kind of coming up towards the end of it here, or?
I think the other issue that is bound up along with American evangelism and a bunch of these other concepts is the concept of we've never done it that way before.
That's a powerful precept here at the university.
That is a powerful precept. Yeah, in every religious system is, well, we've never done it that way. So why should we do it that way now? And it's worked until now. Well, it works until it doesn't. And so.
Preaching to the choir. Sorry.
Oh, can I ask Dr. Rabbi Jana? So one of the things that's always been one of my favorite parts of the Old Testament is Exodus 3:14. I am the but it's the theophany. You know, the approach to the burning bush requires a removal of shoes and you know better than I do, but it is a miracle, and we call them theophanies in theological language. But to me, one of the most important texts to understand in all the Old Testament is that revelation of God as a personal God, rather than an omniscient creator, intelligent God. And I'm just curious from a very, whether theological or personal perspective, what that theophany means to you.
One of the things that I get from it, and this may take another whole conversation, is that when God says the answer, he says, Ehi asher ehi, and I'm sure that you know that that means I am becoming what I'm becoming, that we all have a relationship with God that is continuing to evolve. And it's a lot of times we hear a translation that says what I call the Popeye version, which is the I am what I am. But it's a becoming. It's a continuous process. It's a not ending process. And that moment is a very powerful moment for me. I struggle all the time with what holiness means. And God says this ground is holy, and God says I am what I am, and I am becoming what I am becoming, or I will be what I will be. And that blows my mind every time I think about it. And I do think that that's going to take a longer conversation than what we have left in this. And that's a very obvious miracle. And then it is a miracle also, the flame and what the flame represents all of the time for us as a continuous miracle is also important. So I don't think that got to answer your question, because I think that that's going to take some time, but I do hope that it helps to think about the fact that it is it's a future tense. There's no, in biblical Hebrew, it's not a future tense. It's an incomplete action. It's not done yet. And we each have a very personal relationship with God, and that God continues to reveal God's self to us as to what that needs to be. And I think that miracles are a very important part of that, honestly, and that I hope that we continue to be open to seeing the miracles in our everyday lives.
Any final thoughts from any other panelists? Otherwise, I can close us out and introduce our next talk.
And I recommend one text for y'all to look at. You do have access to a Bible, which you can get on the internet. Acts 19, chapter 19 of Acts, verses 11 through 20. And just read that text, and we call it Lectio Divina, divine read, but sit with it, whatever that means to you. It may mean sitting outside with it, but say it out loud, but then look at the text. It's one of those things that I don't know about you guys, we never really preach on. We all the things that happen in Acts, it's a lot of Paul being Paul and Peter being Peter. But this is about demons, and this is about the casting out of demons, not by Christians. And what do they do? So it's important to see that even in the first century, literally, we're talking years after Christ rose from the dead and ascended into heaven, they're already dealing with a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in the 21st century. Like, do these demons, like if somebody casts out demons, and who does that? How do they do that? But it's just a good text to kind of put perspective on, well, here's what first century Christianity dealt with in terms of the miraculous. I mean, all of Acts has a lot of miracles, but that passage is a really good one to just see the text for yourself. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, certainly to our panelists and to our audience on Zoom, and our panelists on Zoom. We're a whole multimodal kind of experience here. Our next roundtable will be April 5th, and the topic for that one will be sacred texts. So that's I will invite our panelists to return, as well as some of the panelists we've had in the past. And not sacred Twitter. That's a text. Anyhow, I shall see hopefully all of you and at our future place events as well. So thank you very much, folks. We appreciate it.